Hey, it's Romania Black, and look, would you blame me if I put booze in my coffee for this evening? Because let's be real, we're on episode 25 of Revolutionary Girl Utena, and last week was the stereotypical Nanami episode. They're like, oh, episodes 22 and 23 were batshit crazy, and you probably have lots of questions, but we're not going to answer those questions in episode 24. We're going to give you a Nanami episode that's kind of a recap, kind of a little character study, kind of some Nanami fun, and we'll just let you have that and stew on it a week and forget the madness. I didn't forget the madness. I'm here to embrace the madness, don't you worry, but I'm also absolutely terrified because I have no clue what to expect. And like I've been telling you all, like the past month, if we go by the 3-act structure, we are going to be 2/3 of the way through this series by next week. And I feel like Act 2 is going to end with episode 26, and I feel like these next 2 episodes are going to be insane. So I've put booze in this coffee tonight because I'm prepared for the insanity. So let's buckle in, eh? I do have some comments to talk about before we do that, though, so we need to dive into that and just see what our fellow commenters are saying. So I do want to make note. I did make a notation in my comments that I've got pulled up here. Are the students, when in the Black Rose arc, are they fueled by the desires of Mikage, who is older, or are they just their own base desires amplified? It seemed like it could be a mixture of both. I want to lean towards the latter and say that it's just their own base desires that are amplified, but I don't know. You know what? The one thing about the show is that it has a lot of mysteries yet to unfold, and that's going to kind of tie into some of the comments that people have been leaving. I've been telling the moderators to be very, very strict with comments, and they've weeded out. There were a lot weeded out this week because they were like, nope, spoilers, and I was like, And I know it's hard. It's hard to not want to explain to me what's going on because I'm only, at episode 24, but I really want to stay away from hints and clues because I want to figure it out for myself. And if at the very end of the series I haven't figured it out, then you can tell me. But I have a feeling I'm pretty smart. I know I'm smart enough to figure it out. I just want the show to I want to experience the show as you all have from the first get-go without somebody telling me, well, this is what it means. And I'm like, no, just let me figure it out. And if at the end of the day, if I haven't figured it out, then you can say something. But I know that requires a lot of patience. So going into that, Mary Flugelhorn 7352. This was actually, they're catching up on my reactions. This was a comment back from episode 12 that I thought would be interesting to bring up. So they say it's only after Toga commands her to cast off her body and protect the sword that we hear Anthy's own inner voice for the first time. I feel like, have we not heard her own inner voice before? I guess that is the first time in episode 12. Her own thoughts for no audience but herself. She starts to remember something that sounds very important, and we talked about that in the discussions back in those episodes. And at that moment, the red light goes out of the sword and back to her. So her memory could have sparked the power going back to her instead of extending to Toga's sword. I've always wondered if the quote-unquote Firefly star of the beautiful duel song happening in that episode could be Anthy's true self, sparking to life for a few moments before dipping back into her bride role. Did the power revert in order to stop her from waking up any further? I really don't like that waking up any further dialogue, because that to me feels like it's hinting at Anthy needs to wake up, or her powers, like, I know that her power is limiting her because the role of the bride is limiting Anthy's ability to do a lot of things. But I want to be very careful in how you all phrase your comments, and to tell the moderators to be very careful in how things are worded, because I don't want hints or clues at all. I want nothing. I want to go in blind. I want to still read your comments. That's why I have the channel, but just please be aware that, and this person I've had to avoid a lot of their comments because of spoilers according to the mods, so I want to be very careful with that. But I think that's the only one that's like that. Ender Valentine 9588 for episode 20 says, I love the symbolism of the his and hers sheep mugs throughout the episode. I really like this comment, Ender. This is really cool. Like, they belong together as a set, but Wakaba doesn't feel like she's good enough on her own. She wants to be part of a set. And we've talked about that the last couple episodes. And specifically the heteronormity of the his and her mugs. Like, this is the only framework in which she means anything, and it's so sad. plus the symbolism of the meat when Saionji asks about Anthy, it feels very deliberate. And yeah, we talked about this last episode, that people's specialness being tied, especially if they're a female character, with having a male character connected to them. That is exemplified so much in this series at this point. And then we talked about last episode, or the episode before, about Mikage like believing he had to fit into this mold of liking Takiko when the reality is he liked her brother. So there's that whole jamboree. But Ender also says, but is being special really a good thing? I mean, in this episode, Akio likens being special to being on a predestined path. After all, the duelists who make up the main cast are chosen by the end of the world. Are they just manipulated by a higher power to chase being special? Just like Saionji was manipulated by Mikage? And I feel like that could be tied to Mikage. Mikage was used. Mikage thought he was special. And then we find out that Akio was really just using him for the time being, and then didn't care in the end and was manipulating him through Anthy posing as Mamiya. So yeah, there's definitely, I feel like, to me, and I'm not here to advocate for J.K. Rowling because she is a very problematic individual, but I grew up reading Harry Potter, so it's in my head through the zeitgeist. I can't help it. But in that series, you had the main character Harry, and then you had another character named Neville. And without giving too much away, you kind of find out that Neville is special, but had the potential to be even more special. And I felt like when I was reading Ender's comment, it kind of reminded me of that, of Neville's character in that series could have gone on this predestined route, but that wasn't what happened for him. And it was actually more liberating for his character, and a very significant plot point happens because he's not the chosen one, because he's a side character and he has more freedom to kind of go along his own path than be the chosen one set on this predetermined pathway. So I get that. That's a very good point to bring up. And I'm glad you established that, because yeah, maybe being these duelists, as we've come to find out, kind of puts you in a precarious situation that might not give you as much freedom as being one of the side characters does. And that's kind of ironic in itself, because here you have Wakaba and these other side characters who think that they're not special and therefore not of value, when the reality is you might have more ability and privilege and freedom than the special quote unquote people do. So I think that's so interesting, and I'm really glad that you brought that up, Ender. That's really, really cool. Then Francesca White 4166 says, I like how Anthy seems to feel a kinship in Nanami's minions. Like, she holds the umbrella like Keiko during the duel. She is one of the only ones that remembers their names. And she has that line at the end of episode 21. I guess as the Rose Bride, she can relate to not being seen as a real person, like they aren't seen as real people by Nanami. That's such a good point. I hadn't considered the idea that, yeah, Anthy has really connected with all these side characters because she gets how they are. She gets what they're going through. And then you have Utena, who's the protagonist, who's like, who is that? What's going on? But she's a protagonist, so she wouldn't know. Work, Francesca. I love it. And then finally we have Oliver Jajado's comment, which is Ikuhara's commentary for episode 21. A commentary all about vermin. Episode 21, Troublesome Insects. When I was a kid, I crushed bugs and small animals with my feet for the more or less meaningless reason that they were quote-unquote ugly. A child's world is governed by the absurd and cruel rules. If there's a rule that something must be crushed underfoot, it is a crime to want to be on the crushing side. Rather, is it a crime to want to be on the crushing side rather than the crushed side? Special beings are beautiful, and they're never trampled on. That girl could distinguish between beautiful things and ugly things. I suspect that ability was her misfortune. She thought, what's the difference between her and me? A miracle occurred. Maybe I can be a special being too. Is she the vermin? Or am I? That's kind of the thing we talked about with episode 20, with episode 21 as well, is the idea that it really is sometimes a matter of circumstance, and we're all human, so we're all capable of technically being chosen or not chosen, contrary to what the show tells us sometimes. But I kind of like this idea that both being beautiful and being ugly, the world does kind of work in a very cruel system. And I've seen it firsthand from my own experiences. I'm sure you all have, where people sometimes do get special privileges by how they look or who they're related to or what their name is or what they've inherited and stuff like that. So I like the idea that the creator is saying, you know, when you have the choice between to be crushed or to crush, it's very easy to choose crush. And that's kind of what a lot of these duelists have done, even when they know it's not perhaps the most appropriate or correct path. So, but everybody's capable of being vermin. It's just like, can you figure out the system? And then what do you do with that system? So, but yeah, I'm terrified, y'all. I've spent 10 minutes, I know, going on about this. But before we start, I want to give a very quick shout out over to our philanthropy tier over on Patreon. A special shout out to Anthony, who got me the files of Revolutionary Girl Utena to watch. Super appreciate that. But I haven't given the Patreon philanthropy tier shout out in these videos in a while, mainly because it's taken so long to get through the intro, but I want to today. So a special shout out to Alex Cornejo, to Anime Annie, to Be Happy, to Bryant Reed, to Dana, to Damage3245, to Destiny Marie, to Devorin, to Danny Donmai, to Danger Zone, to Eric, to Ichu, to Fisho, Ghostly Turnip, El Freya, Liam Poles, Lyndon, Matthew Palfinier, Murphy, Maroni W, Alexandra Q, as well as Nicholas, Sunspots, Nancy Mass Art, Trails, Translucent Men, as well as I Alone Am the Bitchless One. Thank you all so much for your support. I greatly appreciate it. All of my love. Okay, like I said, I got boozed up coffee. I didn't watch the preview. I have no freaking clue what I'm about to get into. That is a scary and elating place to be. And knowing this show, it's gonna go off the rails because Mikage's gone and Mamiya's Anthy, and we've just got Akio left, so who knows? Y'all, look, I know so often with Yuri and BL, you got to go through darkness before the dawn. So am I fully prepared for Anthy to be taken away from Utena? Yes, I am prepared for this to happen. Do I think Utena's going to get her back? I hope so. I hope they have a happy ending. But I'm prepared for some potential doomed Yuri to happen and make me... I tell myself if I can get through episode 11, I can get through anything. But I feel like such a summer child saying that. You know what? We're going to pull off the Band-Aid. We're going to pull off the Band-Aid and we're just going to go for it. We're just going to see what happens. It'll be fine. Everything will be great. Y'all, I'm terrified. So we're going to start episode 25 of Revolutionary Girl Utena. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. I'll see you all on the other side. There's not enough booze in this. Nope! Nope! No! Nope! Nope, nope, nope! Nope, nope, nope! Nope, nope, nope! Look, I know things come in threes. And that seems to be how a lot of things go in this world. But look, 2024. Y'all, things come in threes. I've had 3 series. Three series that I've read this year that have involved snails, Revolutionary Girl Utena, Uzumaki, and Land of the Lustrous. And I was like, oh, it's the year of the snail. And damn it, now I have 3 series that are dealing with sexual assault. And can we just stop for 2 seconds? I mean, I am not surprised that that's where we've gone with Akio. Akio's gotta go. He's gotta go. Bye, bitch. We gotta stop Akio because, oh, no. We're going to talk about that whole scene with Anthy at the end because that was his silhouette. I went back and looked. That was his silhouette against her at the end, right before the ED. Great new ED. Awesome. I don't know if we're going to change OPs anytime soon, but if we have this ED at the end, that's great. I'm sure I'll be analyzing it as we go. I was mainly focusing on the lyrics, but I've already forgotten them because this episode was insane. Okay. There's a lot to unpack, so buckle in. I'm sure I'm going to miss things. I'm sure there's going to be new things come to light as we go, but there was a lot of sex in this episode. There was a lot of whoring around. There was a lot of innuendos. There was a lot going on. And I was like, oh, No Notomy episode this week. No siree, Bob. So we're gonna break down that whole student council scene because I feel like that needed to happen. But is Akio the end of the world? Or is he the harbinger of the end of the world? We're gonna be looking at some stuff here as well. So just you wait. Is the end of the world itself that he says, I'm gonna show you the end of the world? Is the end of the world a connection to the death or end of your innocence as a person, and a sign of sexual maturity and adulthood is the end of the world? And that, therefore, the idea of eternity becomes the idea of that nostalgia or that memory that can be held onto and therefore given hope to someone. That seems to be like what it's been throughout this, and he's suggesting he's given that. I can't trust Akio at all, though, because we've seen he manipulates people's memories. He's manipulated Mikage's memories, so there's a very good chance, like, we'll talk about that extremely homoerotic car ride. Come on, Barbie, let's go party! We'll talk about that here in just a second. Oh my god, y'all, I feel like I need to drink a fifth of whiskey after having that episode, because it's a lot. It's a lot. Okay. We're just going to go through one by one. I've got a couple articles that I wanted to pull up and talk about myself, but we're going to go through this one by one and start out with the car ride. I instantly thought of Suwabuki and when Nanami was almost hit by the car. Like, was Nanami almost hit by Akio? No, probably not. How would Toga feel if that was the case? He probably wouldn't care, which is the crazy thing. Toga's bad. Toga's an ass of a person, but Akio is even worse. Akio's even worse. Akio may be like the most loathed villain that I've seen in a long time, second only to maybe Griffith and Berserk. They might be the only two villains that I'm just absolutely not about. I want him to burn in a ditch is basically how I want this to go down. I want his genie lamp to get thrown into lava, Aladdin 2 style, and I want Iago to fly away and be saved. That's all I want. That's all I want. So let's dive into this scene as Akio is coming back from who knows where. At first glance on this, where we see them driving down the road, I mean, the car is bitchin'. The car is my style of car. So for it to be featured so prominently, I don't blame them, because the animation in this car is kind of a stroke of genius and I love it. And this is exactly the type of car style that I love. So would I showcase this car every single episode from now till episode 39? Yes, I would. I would bring it up every single time. But it's red. It's like, I think of Cruella de Vil in 101 Dalmatians. She drives this red convertible that's like, and literally her name Cruella de Vil is the devil, which is Akio, that's Lucifer. We're going to talk about that. We got a whole thing about Lucifer. I'm getting ahead of myself. But yeah, so the idea of seduction and the car and everything, and it's red and vibrant and shiny with gold accents, and it's driving them straight on a one-way ticket to hell. So, and it's also a stick shift. Hi 90s, how you doing? Also, gonna say, there's so many sexual innuendos in this episode, but first off, let's talk about the fact that it's a stick shift. The fact that it's an 8-speed or 6-speed, 5-speed, whatever, it's a stick shift. You got to grab a hold of that stick and you got to put it in gear. If you know what I mean, that's what they're getting in this episode. And pushing on the gas, put the pedal to the metal, increase your speed. I also like how the gears, not only the odometer and everything, have the gold framing, but inside there's the green light, which we've had in the episodes with Mikage. We've had the green, kind of like the Wizard of Oz sort of transfixing there. Which, there you go. The license plate saying Otari. Oh my god, somebody has this car. I'm sure in real life someone has this car. I'd be cosplaying the hell out of it at every single place I went to, right? But this convertible, and they're like, you're flying down the road. And so they're like, is it... Whenever they talked about the exquisite vibrations, obviously the vibrations, you can connect to a vibrator, which is a sex toy. But also, I think of in Talladega Nights, the one wife who's always drunk, she isn't getting sexually satisfied by her partner, so she goes to the races and she hears the vibrations because the vibrations give her an orgasm. That's literally what happens in that movie, and that's the joke. It's said twice here on the car rides with these young men who have their shirts open. If anybody that watches this that does not get the sexual innuendos, they are aplenty in this episode. This episode's just sex. It's just sex. The eternal apocalypse, right? So we now have Akio with his hair down. He has a mullet. Gross. And if you notice, Akio is driving there and Toga's shirt is closed at this point, signifying that perhaps this was their first car ride, because the first thing he says is, "Do you care to take the wheel?" So they talk about taking the wheel. Take the wheel. He ain't asking Toga like he's Jesus. No. And then Toga makes the comment that he's not old enough, right? So with cars, there is kind of a symbolic element of a rite of passage, right? There is, like, you have to be 16 in the US to drive a car. I don't know how that is internationally. I don't know if Japan is different. What is the driving age in Japan? I feel like it's maybe a little older. Driving age in Japan is you have to be 18 for a car and 16 for a motorcycle. So thus, that would make sense that you have that would make sense that Toga's like, "Oh, I'm not 18. I'm not legal. I'm still a minor. I can't drive a car yet." And Akio's like, "Oh, come on, you can take the stick shift." Akio is a man-ho, but he's also connected to Venus, which is connected to Aphrodite, that is the deity of love. So we're gonna tie that to Akio here, that the whole concept of Lucifer, and then we're also gonna contact to Venus, which is Venus is the goddess of love, but we're gonna connect to that here. Basically, Akio's a man-ho, and he's getting it on with everyone. Him and Toga are having sex. Like that is beyond the shadow of a doubt. Now, whether or not that means that all the women that Toga surrounds himself with are a front, and he's actually gay, and him and Akio are just having this time. Akio seems like he's pansexual and he'll have sex with anything, which would connect to the whole goddess of love thing. But I feel like, whether or not Toga's actually gay, or if he's just having sex for power, or if he's bisexual, we don't know. I mean, Saionji's a bisexual disaster, but we don't know. But anyway, the idea that Akio wants him to take the wheel, and Toga is like, "Oh, but I'm still not," and he doesn't finish the sentence. And then he says, "Well, aren't you stiff?" And that line, "Aren't you stiff?" not only referring to the fact that Toga is stuffy and very traditional and set in his ways, but "aren't you stiff" could be referring to him having an erection, could be talking about a lot of things. And then, because right after that, Toga says, "Well, that was rather inappropriate, board chairman. Like, oh, you shouldn't be making these sexual innuendos and saying this about me." And then Akio, who's in this very regal looking board chairman outfit, which now he's in full regalia, which is terrifying. He's like, "Oh, well, my Atori Academy values the independence of its students," which is a laugh, right? Because he talks about the idea of independence being like, "Oh, well, we don't want to tie you down to any rules. So if you want to have sex with me as a minor, this is a place of free expression, and we stop time, so you're not actually 17, you're just appearing 17 forever." But in reality, it's a problem. And I can't believe they're so explicit with it, just right out here in the open. And he's like, "Oh, student council president." And then he increases the gas, and they drive even faster. And we assume that after that, Toga probably gave him roadhead. And that was the end of the story. And they saw eternity, and here we are. And it was a done deal from there. But oh my God, I'm very tongue-in-cheek with this episode with their eternal apocalypse. But I mean, apocalypse is the end of the world, end of days. Their eternal end of days. Here we go. And the idea of being caught up in this time loop and never maturing and being stuck right on the edge. Literally, Fleetwood Mac's Edge of 17 is playing eternally. Just, oh my God. So there's a lot happening in this episode that is problematic. One of them is that Utena and Anthy are no longer living in the mansion where they were safe from Akio's clutches. Instead, they're moving directly into the Dick Tower. That is not a good thing. And then the doors open up and there's Akio. Here's my question. The most unrealistic thing about this show is how Akio and Anthy manage to get their beautiful, long, luxurious locks into those tiny little buns and ponytails. That does not seem possible. But anyway, Akio's a freaking creep. He's a creep. He's a predator. He is not to be trusted. He needs to go and be shoved into the flames of Dante's Inferno. I am done with Akio. Bye, bitch. I want to hear your sob story about how lonely you are. Quit manipulating people. Quit taking advantage of them. Quit assaulting them. Your trauma does not mean you get to do those things. So stop it. The booze is kicking in, y'all. So yeah, anytime like Wakaba and Utena are like being like trying to be charmed by him, it's so gross, right? At least Choo Choo can be there, although bless his heart. So yeah, Wakaba shows up to help. I just want Wakaba and Utena and Anthy to run off together. Can they do that? Can they run off together and be safe? Can this happen? Sure, why not? I also don't like the idea that, I'm going to talk about this later, but the fact that their bedroom is just behind a set of blinds. Like at one point you could see their silhouettes behind the blinds when the light was on. So even though it's like this illusion of privacy and this illusion of separation, but it's still very invasive. And if you've ever used blinds before and seen people behind blinds, it's very noticeable. So even though Anthy and Utena believe that they have their own privacy and separation from Akio, he's still able to look upon them at any given time, even when the blinds are in place. So it's still like a measure of control that Akio has over Anthy and Utena, which is creepy. So here's the thing. It feels as if Akio believes that Utena will be able to bring out the prince from the castle. At this point, I'm really wondering if the prince is like, I don't want to get out of the castle. If maybe the prince is the prince trying to stay there to keep from Akio. There's a very good chance of that. Is Akio trying to access the power? Because we know the prince is the power of Dios, and Akio once said power of Dios for himself to control eternity, and which is crazy because Akio seems to have a lot of power already. He seems to have the power to manipulate memories. He seems to have this weird access to eternity that's creepy, and he seems to have a lot of control over people around him. I think that he is scared. He is scared of Anthy. He's scared of Anthy's potential. And so to halt that potential, he keeps her as the Rose Bride. But my theory is that he thought that that somebody was going to bring out the prince from the castle. And then Akio was going to take that power and be able to control all of it. Like control Anthy, control the prince, control the power of Dios, control everything for himself. Because yeah, he does seem to have that stereotypical villain archetype of I'm lonely and I don't have a heart, and if I get all this power, it'll fill the gaping hole in my existence and the void in my soul. And the answer to that question is no, it won't. So I feel like he's trying to do this. And so right now he's using Utena to be like, oh, well, if I can get her to bring out the prince, I can take control of him and then discard her like he's doing everybody else. Seems to be the case. But Utena, meanwhile, has developed this relationship and love of Anthy and vice versa. So I feel like at this point, Akio is worried that Anthy and Utena, if he doesn't keep close eye on them and watch what they're doing, they might elope together, they might run off, or his plans might be ruined if they get too close and Anthy starts to get a willpower of her own. So this entire episode reminded me a lot of Scott Pilgrim. I don't know if the creator of Scott Pilgrim watched Revolutionary Girl Utena. I feel like he did, because in Scott Pilgrim, there's a lot of veiled references to swords being pulled out of souls, which happens in this episode, quite frankly. And so I was like, I wonder if the creator of Scott Pilgrim watched this series and drew a lot of inspiration, because I feel like that they did. But in that series, there is a character named Gideon who tries to have Ramona, the main female character, who has a significant amount of power and is kind of like Anthy. Dun, 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 dun. Actually, yeah, no, Scott Pilgrim. Sorry if I'm spoiling Scott Pilgrim. It's been around for a while. You should still go read it and watch it. It's really good. But it's the idea of Scott, who's kind of this stereotypical like everyman, which is kind of like Utena as our every lady, falls in love with Ramona, aka Anthy, who is this mysterious eclectic girl that has mysterious powers. And we find out that Ramona has all these exes that they've been involved with, and the exes are part of this council that's around Gideon, and Scott, aka Utena, has to battle all of the exes to get to the final hurdle, which is Gideon, aka Akio. And Akio's whole MO is that they have Ramona under his thumb doing whatever he wants her to. And it's really, she doesn't have a lot of control over it. And so Scott has to go rescue her. And that seems to be paralleled with Utena having to rescue Anthy. But part of the situation is that I think what this series is doing that maybe Scott Pilgrim doesn't do as much is that in this, Anthy, I'm hoping, is going to get a little bit more autonomy and a little bit more of her own free will. Whereas Ramona kind of does, but Scott Pilgrim is the main character, and it's kind of about his journey of, the story is not only about him rescuing Ramona from the clutches of this evil creep, but also about Scott learning about himself and having self-love and self-acceptance. And once he can love himself and respect himself, then he can help other people. And that's a big part of it. I think that this series kind of does that, but I do hope that Anthy gets a little bit more agency than Ramona in this series, but we'll talk more about it there. But sorry I went on that Scott Pilgrim tangent, but there are a lot of similarities that I'm noticing. But I do feel like Akio is a lot like Gideon in that he's trying to keep Anthy under his thumb. He might know that she potentially has a lot of power, and he wants to make sure that she doesn't have a lot of free will, that it's kept that she's kept submissive by him, and that she's kept as the Rose Bride, which again, we're talking about gender stereotypes, gender roles, the idea of the bride, the idea of the wife being submissive. He's like Gaston in Beauty and the Beast. Soon you'll get ideas and thinking, and that's exactly what Anthy is doing. Anthy is getting ideas, and she's starting to think, and she's starting to resist the power and control that Akio has, and he's getting pissed about it, and things are getting more and more reckless and crazy. And my biggest fear at this point is Utena is still in the dark about so much. And here's the worst part of it. The student council is off trying to figure things out for themselves. They're off trying to do their own calculations. And Mickey in this episode tries to go to Utena being like, hey, we've discovered some things. We need to tell you about these things. And so Utena always feels like I feel like she's the last to know about all of this. And I feel like she's going to get manipulated, and it's going to come back and bite Utena, and she's going to say something or do something that's going to really upset or be a disadvantage to Anthy, and it's going to lead to this big breakup that I'm hoping is temporary, and that it's going to lead them to get back together. I'm watching Arcane at the same time as all this. And it's just so frustrating. But yeah. So anyway, they're all moving into the tower. And sure, it's nicer than the haunted house. It's all gold and prestigious and everything. There's also the flowers on the table. Like, there's the flowers by this window of constellations and everything. And these pink roses. I wanted to real quick look up, are pink roses, what do they symbolize? Admiration, happiness, love, which, you know, a strong friendship or the love between family members, respect or admiration towards someone close to you. I mean, it would make sense that those are being shown alongside Akio, Utena, and Anthy. Would all make sense, wouldn't it? But yeah, it's beautiful no matter what you say. You should be going jackpot. And Jen's like, yeah, I mean, this place is pretty nice. And then Wakaba talks about how handsome Akio is. Now, one thing that I really like is that Wakaba says, you know, he has such an angelic smile, which we'll talk about a second with Lucifer and the whole angelic smile thing. What I like about Utena is that she's like, oh, he's engaged. Like, he's off limits. He's off the table. And she's like, look, Wakaba, he's already got a fiance. And Wakaba's like, oh, he does? Well, that sucks. Why in the world is every hot guy in the world already taken? Girl, I asked that question quite a bit. But I do like the fact that neither Utena nor Wakaba are homewreckers, which says a lot compared to several other characters in this series. But yeah, so then of course Akio's like, "What's taken?" And I'm like, "Bitch, Akio doesn't think of himself as taken. Akio's in an open relationship with everyone he wants to screw over in this series, right?" As he brings the coffee and tea set out. Oh my god. So like, since we have no other family, I naturally wanted my little sister near, which, now it has such a more sinister tone that he wants the sister there. It's like, oh, you couldn't have Anthy near you any other time, but now, now you want her. Also, that flower pot with roses has been present ever since episode 22 with Mikage and Takiko. So I'm wondering if it has something to do with memories, if there's stuff connected to it. We still have a ways to go in this series, but it's on my radar that basket of roses has been in between characters talking for several times over the last several episodes. And I don't know if it's just a stylistic choice that Ikuhara is making or if it's making a statement. I don't know. But anyway, he talks about wanting his sister there, and she's finally made a friend. So he's like, well, I would hate for us to separate, so you can just come and stay too. I like Wakaba's like, I'm her friend. Wakaba's like, I'm a friend too, can I stay? And he just casually dismisses her and is like, oh, well, I hope you continue to be there for her. Like, just basically says, no, you can't stay here. It's so weird that Wakaba is now super nice to Anthy when, 4 episodes ago she was threatening to kill her because of Saionji. But again, memories are manipulated in this. And was Wakaba really interested in Saionji, or was it just the aspect of being wanted and being special? It's still super creepy because there's all these girls in this episode, and yet they're all kind of floundering around Akio, who's the only man in the room. Again, talking about this idea of heteronormity and the idea that a woman's value is only significant if there's a man around, which is utter bullshit. But how do we do? And then Utena's like, now, is there a problem? And they all get along, and the whole time that Anthy's like enjoying and having a good time, like she's just laughing at the antics of Wakaba and Utena, like a normal person. But it's the fact that Akio's staring at her. And she's like, I'm just being my usual self. And Anthy laughing is a sign that Anthy is having some will of her own. She's doing something not because she's being told to do it, but because she's not just sitting there with a blank stare like a little submissive wife. She actually is her own person, and she's laughing at their antics. And when it cuts hard to Akio looking like the prince from Unico in the forest, I was like, oh, hell no. I'm like, Akio, why do you... And honestly, I think one of the biggest things is that Akio is scared of Anthy. I think Akio is afraid because Anthy's stronger than him. In all reality, he's just manipulated her and convinced her that she's weaker than him. And that's how he controls her, through manipulation, which is what abusers do. They manipulate people to believe that they're weaker than them so they can take advantage of them. But oftentimes it's projecting their own insecurity and their own weakness, and Akio's trying to hide all that. And so otherwise, why would he be so mad that she's having a good time? It's disgusting, and I want to throw him in a ditch. Anyway. So then we cut to the student council and Saionji returning. The best part about this is that nobody cares that Saionji is back. My problem is Saionji has the capabilities of being a good person. He just keeps coming back to this toxic shit. Like, go out, get out of the academy, get out of Hotel California, and go live your life, Saionji, and you'll be in a much better place. And they're like, where were you until you were admitted back, Saionji, is the first question they ask. And then he's like, well, that's not important. Which is like, it's not important that I was with Wakaba. Let's just ignore that. And he throws a letter on the table. And then, so, anytime that we have had student council meetings lately, there's always been this background symbolism that is happening. So in this episode, the background symbolism is a baseball game. And strikes and balls and outs, which put 2 balls on the screen. You know what else has 2 balls? Half the cast in this series. So anyway, they start out by talking about Saionji saying, I'm through with dueling. And so it feels like when they say lead, they're talking about a player about to steal. I'm using my Ace of the Diamond knowledge at this point. So Saionji says he's back and not a duelist anymore. So he says he's not, I'm going to get this over here where hopefully I can talk loud enough and y'all can hear me. He says he's not a duelist anymore. He has moved beyond that. And Nanami's like, well, what in the world does that mean, as someone grabs the baseball bat? And he says, what these letters say is not to be trusted. And they say strike. So we say the letters should not be trusted. And that is given a strike. Now, does the strike mean that they're wrong? Does the strike mean that you swung and missed? And that it was that should we say that the letters can be trusted? The strike would make me believe that he's lying, or that that's false. And we have 2 strikes and 2 balls. Imagine. And they're like, being tricked by that fake letter seems to have taught you a lesson, as the plate is getting swept off. I like that Saionji kind of like tisks at Juri, but Juri's right. Like, he was tricked by the fake letter, and she's like, did you learn a lesson? And then Mickey says, I've already verified the contents of the letter. And they're like, all right, all right. So they give the ball back, like the ball's caught, and there is an out. So Mickey says that he's verified the letter. And as the letter is verified, they get an out. Like, okay. Indeed, when I passed through the rose gate, he says, and then we have a strike at the center of the stairway to the dueling area, and there's another strike. A gondola appeared, which is the strike batter out. So we get another out when Mickey is talking about the gondola at the center, setting this all up. So it's almost like the outs are like game, set, and match sort of situation, where they're like, okay, 2 strikes. We've got all these strikes, so we got some outs. We've verified the contents of the letter. We know that there's a gondola in the center. So what else do we do with that? And then it's like, what do you mean a gondola? And so then he's like, allegedly it's going to advance us to a new stage. And then we see the rows, and there's the 3 of them. What I like is that you have the primary colors of red, blue, and yellow represented with Juri and Mickey and Nanami. And then you have your secondary colors, which Saionji is one of them, with green. Purple would be another secondary color, which could be Anthy and Akio. Orange is the 3rd secondary color, which you could say Wakaba is. But yeah. And so he says, whether the contents of leather are true or false do not matter. I don't believe I signed up for being the end of the world's lackey. Well, you're going to eat those words in about 10 minutes, Saionji. But anyway, then whenever like somebody slides to base, but it says they're out and the game is set. So out, game set, with Saionji saying he's not a lackey. I feel really bad for Saionji, because Saionji is used a lot in this series. Like, at this point, even though Saionji does value whatever he can salvage of his friendship with Toga, and it's clear that Saionji wants to connect with Toga. Toga's a bitch. I feel like Toga will realize all too late this. I think that Akio will throw Toga away? Absolutely. He threw Mikage away like it was nothing. Like, I think that Akio will use Toga and his influence as long as it will run him, and then he will throw Toga to the wind, because Toga at the end of the day is expendable to him, but he's having his fun with him and he's using him to the full extent. The thing that makes me so sad is that Saionji is such a pawn, and Mikage called it out episodes ago. Mikage is like, you're the fool and you're going to keep being used until you can't be used anymore. And this episode was a prime example of it. It's like, Saionji, I feel bad for him and I don't want him to be used, but he like sets himself up. So there's all the confetti. The confetti flies down and Saionji's like, I will not fight because of someone's orders. Well, that's exactly what ends up happening. Oh my God. And he's like, don't try to stop me. And then Nanami's like, well, I don't want any of this either. What's interesting is they're all drinking tea out of the same sets as like what Akio has. And they're like, and that aside, who exactly is the end of the world? Mickey seems to be the one that's trying to figure a lot of this out, right? But as the confetti goes and scatters to the end, they ask the question, who is the end of the world? And Akio answers, saying it's that star, more vivid than usual today. And he's like, look, it's that one right there. I do not like him putting his arm around her whatsoever. And the thing about it is, if it were me in that position, I'd be like, aren't you engaged? Aren't you engaged? This is a bit creepy. You're an adult. She's a minor. You're supposed to be engaged. I'd be a little bit freaked out by this. Utena is so innocent and blissfully oblivious that you can tell she's like, oh, this is weird. But he doesn't seem like he's doing anything malicious. And Akio's a groomer. Kind of. Is. He's kind of a groomer. He gets people set up and he manipulates them until he can be sexual with them. I know groomer is a word that's tossed about quite a bit. And before we go into the talk about Lucifer, I want to look up that definition of it. That, let me see here. Glad, which talks about it. Let me say, I mean, I don't like using that term quite, I don't like using it willy-nilly because it has a lot of implications, but let me see here. I want to get out of this. Get me out of that. And to talk about it. It's basically, Rain, which talks about helping people through sexual violence, talks about, it says a tool common to those who sexually abuse kids is grooming, manipulative behaviors that abusers use to gain access to a potential victim, coerce them to agree to the abuse, and reduce the risk of being caught. While these tactics are often used against younger kids, teens and vulnerable adults are also at risk. Grooming can take place online or in person. It's usually employed by a family member or someone in the victim's circle of trust, such as a coach, a teacher, a group leader, or someone who naturally has interactions with the victims. Well, Akio would fit that both for Anthy and for Utena, although we'll focus on Utena in this. And Toga as well, right? It says grooming can take many forms, but it also follows a similar pattern. One is victim selection. Abusers often observe possible victims and select them on base of ease of access or their perceived vulnerability. Well, Toga and Utena and Anthy, right there, that instantly check. Gaining access and isolating the victim. Abusers will attempt to physically or emotionally separate the victim from those protecting them and often seek out positions in which they have contact with minors. Well, Toga in the car, Anthy in the observatory by herself, Utena on the couch, like, check. Trust development and keeping secrets. Abusers attempt to gain trust of a potential victim through gifts, attention, sharing secrets, and other means to make them feel that they have a caring relationship and to train them to keep the relationship secret. Well, the stuff about eternity in the car with Toga and sharing all these special advice sessions with Utena, yeah, check. Desensitization to touch and discussion of sexual topics. Abusers will often start to touch a victim in ways that appear harmless, such as hugging, wrestling, and tickling, or the latter to escalate to more increasingly sexual contact, such as massages or showering together. Abusers may also show the victim pornography or discuss sexual topics with them to induce the idea of sexual contact. I don't know if driving around with your shirt open and hopping onto the hood of a car counts as that, but it could. And the whole idea of him touching her and doing all that and being around her like that, yeah, kind of, a bit. Attempts by abusers to make their behavior seem natural. To avoid raising suspicions, for teens who may be in closer age to the abuser, it can be particularly hard to recognize tactics used in grooming. Be alert for signs that your teen has a relationship with an adult that includes secrecy, undue influence or control, or pushes personal boundaries. Yeah, no, Akio is a groomer. He's clicking off all the criteria, and it's super creepy. No, I'm like, stay back, sir. But yeah, and the worst part about this is that as he's like, look to where my hand is pointing, as he's doing this, and of course, Utena's like, I mean, she's blushing because she's like, oh, this guy has his arm around me. This is uncomfortable and awkward. He's like, that star up there is bright, is practically shining bright, is Venus. And he's like, the moment he said morning star, I was like, talking about Lucifer. My name, Akio, comes from this star's name. And she's like, oh, wow, isn't that cool? And she's like, it's kind of romantic. And he's like, the morning star is also known as Lucifer. And the moment he says Lucifer, we cut to Anthy, who has the glasses whited out so you can't see how she's responding sort of thing. Yeah. And here's the thing. I feel like there's a lot of emotions tied with Anthy in this moment. One, is Anthy jealous that he has his arms around Utena, which is someone that Anthy cares about? Probably. And is Akio putting his arms around her and doing this in front of Anthy to show that he has dominance over Utena and that Anthy can't have her? Probably. But also, is Anthy potentially disappointed in Akio, being like, why are you doing this? Like, you and I have this relationship too. What's going on? Oh, absolutely. I'm sure there's a plethora of different emotions and things going on in this one scene. And Anthy, the worst part is Anthy's probably jealous that he has his hand around Utena, which she likes. Mad and disappointed that he's acting this way when he's been the way that he has around her. And also probably feels helpless because as the Rose Bride, she can't really do much in this scenario because he's kind of gotten her Pavlovian response to her feeling helpless around him. Because if you think about it, because she's the Rose Bride to Utena, technically Akio shouldn't have control over her, but... So then Akio says the star that was once an angel, yet chose to become the Prince of Darkness. Now that's a very interesting phrasing, and chose to become the Prince of Darkness. And Anthy's just like, he says, looking up at it from our planet, it is always near the sun. Which you could attribute to, is it referring to always being near the power of Dios? I don't trust Akio any further than I can throw him. Yeah, he's like, unless the sun sets, it can never shine. Which to me sounds like unless the prince is out of the picture, he doesn't get the chance to shine in the moment. I'm like, what are you, Scar from The Lion King and the prince is Mufasa? What? And then Anthy's just sitting there, just staring. He's like, what must it think as it shines? I mean, that's a cute story. I feel so bad that you don't feel adequate unless you have power and your brother or the prince doesn't. But, that doesn't excuse what you're doing. And of course, Utena's like, it seems like a sad story to her. And she's like, wow, he seems really lonely. But I'm like, girl, of course Utena would have the utmost sympathy for him because he's playing this little violin sob story. And I'm like, girl, you need to just smack him. You're getting played, girl. And Anthy's just like, Anthy has that look on her face like, this is a crock of bullshit. And you know it. But yeah. And then he takes his arm off it whenever Anthy comes over. And she's like, oh, dinner's about to be ready. And she's like, oh, cool, really? She's like, oh, I'm starving. And she's like, well, if you'll excuse me, Akio-san. Uh-huh. Yep. And of course, he just smiles as the enclosure comes up again. Nope. Okay, so as far as Lucifer goes, I'm not looking at the Christian version of Lucifer because Lucifer is the fallen angel from heaven. Instead, since this series focuses more on Roman folklore and etymology, I wanted to kind of go that route. So, in Roman folklore, Lucifer, or Lightbringer in Latin, was the name of the planet Venus, though it was often personified as a male bearing a torch. Which is rather interesting because we often think of Venus and Aphrodite as female for the goddess of love. Right? And whether that ties into like gender roles and heteronormativity and masculinity, and if men are supposed to represent love and everything like that. But, Pepe Le Pew. But what's interesting about that is the concept of a torch, because usually torches are also symbolic of knowledge. And here you have Akio, who carries all the knowledge about, as far as we know, Akio has the most knowledge of what's going on. And we are only allowed bits and pieces of that knowledge based on what he gives us through his interactions with the other characters. So him having the torch makes a lot of sense in this series. It says the Greek name for this planet was variously Phosphoros, meaning Lightbringer, or Hieosphoros, meaning Dawnbringer. Lucifer was said to be the fabled son of Aurora, and Cephalus, the father of Sakes. He was often presented in poetry as heralding the dawn. So yeah, like bringing about the morning dawn. Okay. The Latin word corresponding to Greek phosphorus is Lucifer. It is often used in astronomical senses in both prose and poetry. Poets sometimes personify the star, placing it in a mythological context. So then there's a lot of talk about just the meaning and relationships. And it said the 2nd century Roman mythographer said of the planet, the fourth star is that of Venus, Luciferus by name. Some say it is Juno. Its many tails, as it's recorded, it's also called Hesperus as well. It's the largest of all stars. Some have said it represents the son of Aurora and Cephalus, and who surpassed many in beauty, so that even he vied with Venus. And there's another one here. It is visible at both dawn and sunset, called both Luciferus and Hesperus. Anyway, in classical Roman period, Lucifer was not typically regarded as a deity and had few, if any, myths, though the planet was associated with various deities and often poetically personified. Cicero stated that you say that Sol and Luna are deities, and the Greeks identify the former with Apollo and the latter with Diana. But if Luna is a goddess, then Lucifer, the morning star, also and the rest of the wandering stars will have to be counted as gods, and if so, then the fixed stars as well. So you could say, since we've been doing this whole trio and triad thing, you could talk about there being Apollo for the sun. You could have Diana or Luna for the moon, and then you could have Lucifer as the in-between. And we've talked about that in previous episodes, the idea that you have the prince, you have Anthy, and you have Akio, and maybe Akio feels like the third wheel. Maybe he feels unloved, and so he's trying to just circumvent his power to feel this love and project his insecurities, but this isn't the way you do it, sir. But anyway, so it also says in Sumerian folklore, there's a lot of motifs. The motif of a heavenly being striving for the highest seat of heaven, only to be cast down to the underworld, has its origins in the motions of the planet Venus, known as the morning star. So basically you could say, well, if Akio was trying to get the power of Dios and be on par with the prince, who he's his brother, whatever, friend, whatever, but ends up falling down to the underworld or hell, or here we are at the end of the world, then that would make a lot of sense for the Akio. It also says the Sumerian goddess Inanna, the Babylonian Ishtar, is associated with the planet Venus, and Inanna's actions in several of her myths, including Inanna and Shukalatuda, and Inanna's descent into the underworld, appear to parallel the motion of Venus as it progresses through its synodic cycle. A similar theme is present in the Babylonian myth of Etana. The Jewish Encyclopedia comments, the brilliancy of the morning star, which eclipses all other stars, but is not seen during the night, may easily have given rise to such a myth, as was told of Ethana and Zu. He was led by his pride to strive for the highest seat among the star gods on the northern mountain of gods, but was hurled down by the supreme ruler of the Babylonian Olympus. So, could we say that Akio is trying to gain power to meet back up with the prince and take his place on the throne on top of the little egg? Maybe. Possibly. I think that could be a nice way to interpret it. That seems to be the case so far. And then, of course, there's the Christian overtones of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Evil and the Garden of Eden. Turned basically into the Garden of Evil. There's just a lot. I mean, I feel like most people know about the Christian mythology around Lucifer, so I'm not going to go into detail with that. But crazy talk. Crazy talk that we have so much with this episode. Oh, my God. So anyway, back to the Dick Tower. Again, you could see through into the two of them. And the way that they both fall away from each other mirrors the transformation and the sword sequence that we see later on with them, which is great. I want to talk about this bed. So this bed kind of looks similar to a spiral. I said yin and yang, but I wanted to get to the Fibonacci spiral because it kind of looks like that. The Fibonacci sequence, which kind of looks like this spiral, is where in which each number is the sum of two preceding ones. The numbers that are part of the Fibonacci sequence are known as Fibonacci numbers. Many writers begin the sequence with 0 and 1, although some start with 1 and 1. They were first described in Indian mathematics as early as 200 BC. They appear unexpectedly often in mathematics, so much that there's an entire journal dedicated to their study, the Fibonacci Quarterly. They're also strongly related to the golden ratio, and implies the ratio between two consecutive numbers tends to the golden ratio as it increases. Dun, 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 dun. Fun times. So yeah, math is not my strong suit, so just looking at some of this math makes me want to throw up. So, but it does look like the Fibonacci square. But here's the thing. What got me beyond the spiral, beyond the yin and yang and everything, is the fact that you have a circle like this, right? Where you have one half here and one half there. They're not perfectly connected. They're not a perfect circle. They're not connected fully. It's like they're close. They're so close to being together, but still they're so far. And I feel like that's indicative of Utena and Anthy's relationship. They're really close to being in a great relationship with one another, but there's still hurdles. There's still some things in the way. So, I mean, if they could just flip their bodies over that way, they could probably make it work. But in any case, so Utena says Akio's really nice, isn't he? And Anthy's just like, well, I gotta say yes. Though, she says, whenever he talks about the stars, there's a lonely look in his eyes. Like he's someone who's lost something precious. I don't know if Utena is able to sense the actual melancholy with Akio that's at the root of his character, or if she's just being fooled by him. I feel like we're going to find that out as we go, right? But I do think it says something for Utena's character that she tries to see the good in people when I'm over here like he's a walking red flag, literally. So, and even Anthy just kind of doesn't react to it. She's like, oh, there's something about him that gives me this nostalgic feeling. Well, as is told in this, according to Toga, in the car scene, Akio, according to them, Akio is the prince that gave her the ring. Supposedly. Now, is it possible that the prince that has the power of Dio stuck in the castle actually gave Utena the ring, and Akio is manipulating the memories to make Toga believe and make it seem like it's him? Absolutely, that could be the case. I don't trust Toga. I don't trust his words. He doesn't know any more than anybody else. He just thinks that he does. So, do I think that it could be that the prince gave Utena the ring and Akio's manipulating those memories? Sure. Do I think there's a possibility that it was Akio and she just wanted to believe it's the prince? Yeah. It's so frustrating because we don't know the full answer yet, and I don't know if the series is going to give us the answer. I'm sure it will, but it's just very frustrating. Also, the rose on the mosaic there has 3 leaves coming off of it and a little torch of light that's knowledge in between them. Notice there's 3 leaves. There's the prince, there's Akio, there's Utena, or Anthy rather, and there's the little lantern of light that's under the biggest leaf, which could be Akio. There are times, and then that's when Anthy says there are times that you give me a nostalgic feeling yourself, Utena-sama. And Utena's like, really? Me? And she's like, yes. It's rare for you to say something like that. And she's like, well, pardon me. And Utena's like, no. I want you. It makes me happy when you do that. And that's when she says, hey, if you're ever going through something and need help, you come to me first. I want this to come back, right? I want the two of them to help each other. I also, more than anything, as much as I want Utena to stand up and fight for Anthy, at the end of the day, I want Anthy to fight for herself. Because Utena is, in a lot of ways, as we've talked about in this series, she is projecting the idea of the prince that she got from either the prince or Akio, right? I'm sure that's not going to be used traumatizingly later in this series. Probably will be. But she's using that persona. And so it still, even if Utena protects Anthy, it still comes back around to this idea of a woman needing to have a masculine presence to protect her, whether it's Utena or whoever. But what I want to happen is for Anthy to protect herself and to be able to stand up for herself. And there's little hints of it starting to happen. The question is, like, what all is Anthy going to have to suffer through before she's able to do that? But we have this idea that Utena feels from Akio this nostalgia that seems connected to the prince, aka the power of Dios. And then Anthy feels from Utena there is this nostalgia that is from the power of Dios and the prince. So was the prince possessing Akio at the time he gave her the ring? Was he not? We don't know yet. And she's like, let's help each other out. I want us to have that kind of friendship. And that's what makes Anthy think of back in the past, where the prince gives little Anthy a hug, like kid Anthy gives her a hug We think it's Kid Anthy. It looks like a kid version of her because he's so massive. He says, look, I understand. From now on, I'll live with you so that we can help each other. Now, the question is, I'll live with you so we can help each other. Did the prince used to be connected to Akio? Did they used to be connected and then they were separated? And Akio is desperately trying to get back that power that he once had that had manifested into the prince. That's an idea too. That could be as well, because Akio is now living with Anthy. So was Akio originally the prince, and then kind of like Lucifer fell from grace, lost the power of Dios, and is with Anthy? Or were Anthy and him originally in the castle and Akio took her away? We don't know, because the show hasn't told us yet. So, you know. But then they hold each other's arms and hands in the most beautiful of fashions. And she says, Utena, in truth, I wish she would have answered the question. I wish she would have said more. I wish she would have said something. I wish Anthy's getting closer to speaking and answering those questions. I wish she would have said something. I was like, she was about to tell us something really important and then she didn't. And I was like, damn it, Anthy, I wish you would just tell us something. Why not? And then she just says, never mind. And I'm like, so then we have the car scene. Or rather, we have the lead up to the car scene. Saionji has decided he's not going to be a duelist anymore. He's just going to go back to school. Everything's going to be hunky-dory. And he's just going to sit there and practice kendo. Just sitting there wringing out, scrubbing the floor and wringing out, again, sexual innuendos. He's got his hand around that rag, just wringing out the water from it, wringing out the juices. There's a lot of sexual innuendos in this next 10 minutes. I'm like, what? He's like, you're scrubbing the floor. And he's like, you're still conscientious as ever. And Saionji's just like, look, dude, can't you leave me alone? And Saionji's like, oh, well, Toga says you'll be the champion of the local tournament this year. And then Saionji's like, that's one of the reasons I hate you. You're so condescending and conceited. And he's like, oh. And he's like, I am going to be the champion again, so thank you. But you think of it as nothing but child's play. I like the sound. She's like, you know, this is something meaningful to me, and I do consider it to be something that's of importance, but you think it's just child's play, and you talk down on it like you're better than me. Like, we're the same age, bro. And Toga has that smug smile on his face, and you're just laughing at me. And he's like, well, that's not the case. He says, in the end, truly the strong win out, and that's how the world works. Even if you're proud of your petty tricks, don't forget that you lost to Utena. And he's like, well, so did you. And of course, she's like, well, son of a bitch, quit being mean. He's like, I hear someone said that he's through with duels. Like, Toga just comes like a toxic boyfriend to drag him back to the bowels of hell. Leave Saionji alone. And he's like, I've not given up yet. And that's when he's like, there's someone I want you to meet. Nope, you don't need to meet this person. You don't need to. He says, you haven't really given up, have you? He's like, there it is. Can you hear it? And he's like, what? You're what? And he's like, as long as your soul has not truly given up, it's going to show up. You should still be able to hear the sound that races across the end of the world. So then the car shows up. And he's like, what the fudge? What is that? And then, of course, Saionji turns around, shirt open, says, join us. Come on, Barbie, let's go party. Let's go forth to the world you desire. So, as long as, it feels very Willy Wonka, like as long as you can hear the sound, as long as you can believe it, it feels very Neverland, like you can still go to the end of the world as long as you believe in it. It's just, you know, it's very creepy, very weird. I'm like, what does Toga desire? Toga says the world he desires, and he has a lot of sexual connotations with what he's saying there. I'm like, was he trying to lure Saionji in, being like, do you want sex with me? Is that the world you desire? Well, then let's go, and I'll show you if that's possible or not. I yeah. I'm like, does Toga just want sex? Does he just want power? Is that what he wants? And Saionji's just like, what the fudge? I really wanted to get this picture of Saionji just sitting there with his shirt flapped open, and Saionji's like, what the hell? And then the car pulls up like it's Peter Pan from Neverland, which is problematic in its own right. So then we go back to the car spinning down the road, right? And we have Akio driving Miss Daisy. And Saionji's like, what the fudge? So this whole car scene, like, he's the one who's engaged to Otari's daughter, the board chairman. And he's like, yes. He's also Himamiya Anthy's older brother. And then that's when Toga says, do you want the Rose Bride? And Saionji's like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? He's like, exactly what I said. And he's like, what do you want? What do you aspire to? What do you wish to be? The seductive run of the hand across the car. So Toga is asking Saionji. He's saying, what does Saionji want? What does Saionji want? Does he want the Rose Bride? Now, which is a very weird thing to say when you've just told him that the guy that is in front of you is her brother, and you're like, do you want his sister? I'm like, that's some weird shit, right? But as he's running his hand across the car, I was reminded of, like, years and years ago, there was a video I had watched talking about cars and masculinity and sexuality. And I was like, that's a thing. Like, cars are symbolic. Like, my dad loves cars. Like, there's just something about, I remember watching this video that was talking about how men love automobiles. It's like a thing. And I was like, what is it about that? So I wanted to find some examples. And so I did find two different articles. One is from The Guardian, so I consider it to be relatively, it's a very old article. It's from 2008, but relevant to Utena, right? It says The Sexual Allure of Cars by Stephen Bailey in 2008. Says, a car is the most symbolically rich thing we ever buy. No other artifact requires such investment of energy, money, passion to manufacture. No other artifact sucks such cupidity and yearning from its consumers. Cars are overwhelmingly potent, and there are reasonable and rational forces tied to curtail our use of them. But once, as Henry Ford realized long ago, you've let the genie of consumer freedom out of the box, there's no putting it back. Which, if we've been likening Akio to a genie and Anthy to a genie, the idea that once they're out of the genie bottle, you can't put them back. And as John Steinbeck, the author, noted, the popularity of the Model T means 2 generations of Americans know more about the forward coil than the clitoris, about the planetary system of gears than the solar system. Earlier artists also caught the erotic sense of speed machines. At the beginning of the 20th century, futurist Filippo Tommaso Marinetti said, I became inflamed with the fever and desire of the steely breaths from your full nostrils. I finally unleash your metallic bride. Was he addressing his car or his mistress or both? It is a positional dilemma still known today, but the great age of car design is not to outlive the destructive success of the machine, which, as if a classical myth, has systematically destroyed its own support system. Between the 40s and the 70s, cars of astonishing commercial and beauty were manufactured. And I say this because this is coming from an American perspective, but the mangaka and the creators are probably born around the 60s or 70s, so they full on grew up around the time that this was all going down. The relationship, the article says, between cars and sex is deep. Like all matters of aesthetics, the answer to the question, what makes a car sexy, has direct and associational aspects. A car's shape has a direct effect on us. Sensuous surfaces, voluptuous radii, masculine girth, and aggressive projections all have an erotic character. Saionji, or in this case Toga, seductively stroking the side of this red phallic-shaped vehicle. Here we go. The article says the associations are more subtle, but perhaps more significant. Words readily associated with cars, speed, performance, pleasure, danger, are an occult vocabulary of sex. Factor in notions of comfort, security, texture, and you have the preeminent mechanical aphrodisiac. But with the first oil shock of 1973, a book ever so quietly closed. Ever since, cars with a sexual character have been pornographic rather than erotic, parodic and preposterous, not essential and sublime. A moment has passed with a whiff of leather and hot oil. Anyway, that is all to say that this vehicle and this is very symbolic of sexual things. The other thing I was going to point out is there was actually in 2023, there was a much more recent article published in the National Library of Medicine that talks and is described as even more than that. Men love cars, car guy memes, and hegemonic masculinity. The abstract reads as such. The construction of gender identities occur through a variety of social forces, including memes widely circulated on social media, but beyond the function of internet memes, blah, 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 blah. It says that they're deconstructing the case of quote unquote car guys or car aficionados whose passion for cars is integral to their identity. And there have been memes reflecting the group's aspirational preservation of self, including cars, as a symbolic physical embodiment of hegemonic masculinity. And they did a study there on different car guy memes shared on social media, stuff like that. Flashy cars were often portrayed as more desirable than women, a sentiment encapsulated by the meme, when men love women, but even more than that, men love cars. And then they do an analysis of the memes that explore the ostensible male preference for fantasy cars over emotionally risky relationships. Two salient themes relevant to the conceptions of masculinity emerged. One, car guys' apprehensions about male-female interdependence, and two, frustration with women's discretion in meeting men's emotional and sexual needs. And then the memes are a cross-sectional, unfiltered data source that provide insight into the need to reconcile car culture with gender equality. So yeah, there's been ties to cars connecting to men's feeling of masculinity and the idea that cars are voluptuous, they're sexual, but you don't have to worry about their emotional needs like you do a woman. So, or in this case, these men are all in the same car together, so are they performing masculinity by being in this car when they're all standing there with their shirts undone? You can take with that what you will. But anyway, I got really offhand with that. It says, what do you wish to be? And so Sayonji's like, well, what's the point of asking things like that? And Toga looks like he's like in a state of euphoria and having an orgasm as Sayonji is questioning this. He's like, I don't trust you to begin with. And then Sayonji said, he's like, well, my, I thought you were my one and only friend. And he says, there's no such thing as friendship in this world. So the sad thing is that Sayonji, because of Toga's actions, it's made Sayonji feel like he can't trust Toga and he can't believe him as a friend anymore. He's like, well, you were my friend, but you betrayed me. So why should I trust you anymore? And so then Toga's like, well, is that what you think? And he's like, it's what I know. And of course he has the ring in that moment. And so then it shows the Kendo flashback where Sayonji has his hand tied up by Toga. And he's like, I wonder if you truly believe that. And the answer is, I don't think Sayonji truly believes that. Sayonji's a romantic at heart. Sayonji wants to believe that him and Toga have something beyond just friendship. And he wants to believe that there's something more than that. But Toga is being a bitch and will not grant him any of the resolve or inclination that that's possibly this case. And he's like, where are you going with this? He's like, well, why do you strive for that castle said to hold eternity? So we have the idea of the castle said to hold eternity. And the case of eternity or the control of past, present, and futures in that castle. Do you believe you will find something eternal if you get to enter? So if you get to enter, that grants you the power. And that's kind of what Akio seems to want as well. He wants to go to that castle. For instance, eternal friendship. And Sayonji's like, oh, well, he's like, do you remember the girl in the coffin all that time ago? Sayonji doesn't respond to a lot of these questions. So we could say, does Sayonji want eternal friendship? Does he want to know that friendship exists? Particularly with Toga. Yes, I believe he does. What's so crazy is that Toga at this point, we still don't know Toga's overall MO and why he is down to clown with Akio and all of this. But I'm sure that by the end of maybe wherever this arc takes us, we'll find out. He's like, the girl long ago, do you remember her in the coffin? And he's like, well, something like that might have happened. There was a girl who said she wanted to see something eternal. Yes. And he's like, I don't know. What's interesting is that Saionji was paying more attention to Toga in that flashback than Utena. So he's like, I kind of remember it, but that wasn't his focal point. Whereas for Toga, the focal point was on her. And I feel like, looking back at that flashback, I feel like Toga also wanted something eternal, but he didn't have anything to connect to. Toga is like the quintessential rich kid, where he's had everything given to him, but he's had nothing that there's never been nothing out of reach for Toga except for this eternity. The eternity is the one thing that Toga can't get on his own or be given to him, and that's why he strives it. So when he met Utena in the coffin, as far as we know, if the memory's correct, then Toga connected with Utena because they both seem to want the same thing. And he's like, I barely remember it. And he's like, that night, the one who saved that girl from the coffin was Akio here. Supposedly, according to and I agree with Saionji where he says, what? Because he's like, we were there. What? I don't remember Akio being there. So, but Toga is convinced that he was. So who knows what memories have been manipulated. And so then we have it seems like in that moment, the bandage comes off of his hand. So in that moment, it also seems like Saionji questions Toga in this moment, and that quest for the eternal friendship that he wanted is called into question in that moment. And then we have like Toga bearing his shirt open, like they're all just like, and I'm sorry, this is not just a metaphor for him bearing his soul. Like this is like the devil tempting you. Like you are getting seduced in this moment. And he's like, Akio showed the girl something eternal and saved her. Basically, Toga is suggesting that Akio is the one that gave her the ring and saved her by showing her that there was something eternal. Now, what Toga doesn't know from Utena what the prince told her, because the prince, just gave her motivation. I don't know if Toga assumes that it's something sexual that Akio gave her. I don't know. We don't know. It's not directly stated in this. But he's basically might be assuming it. He showed her the girl something eternal and saved her. And he's like, what? And he's like, well, who the hell are you? Like Saionji's asking all the good questions. And when he grabs him, Akio gets all aroused by it. And he says, isn't this exquisite vibrations? And Toga is all aboard the Akio sex train. Toga is enjoying this and in for the sex ride. And Saionji's like, what the hell are we talking about? And he's like, I'm going to show you the end of the world to you as well. And he's put the ring on his finger, which the rings in the past were contracts, but I also think they're ways of controlling each of them. So as long as you have the ring on, I feel like you're being controlled by Akio. And if you touch him, there's a chance he can put the ring on you, which would definitely make sense that he gave the ring to Utena, but we don't know the full story. Because then Saionji's like, the fudge! Right, and he's like, you can't be him. And then Akio has his shirt open, and he shifts the stick, and he raises the gas. They're going 100. And then as they're going super fast, and Toga's like, this is amazing, and Saionji's like, the fudge, he jumps up onto the hood of the car, and is like, let's just see where the ride takes us. I don't think it can get much more sexual in this moment of him being like, welcome to the orgy that we're about to have. At this moment, it's like Akio is the devil. That is the moment that it's been revealed. He is the villain. He is the devil in all this. Nope. Nope, nope, nope. Oh my God. How can we make this sexual without making this sexual? So then we cut back to the greenhouse. And Utena is like, well, I don't get letters from the end of the world, so I don't know how all this works. And I'm just going to point out, again, we're talking about the sexual innuendos, and I'm running out of space on Whiteboard Coon, but the next image we have are these various roses getting splattered with clear liquid. You could call it rain, but not enough booze in this cup. So yeah, Mickey's like, okay, so you don't know what's going on. Fine, fair. And they're like, what were you saying about the stairway to the dueling area? And he's like, well, I found a gondola under the dueling area. You know, the stairway and the spiral pillar. He's like, yeah, there's a gondola under there. You don't have to keep walking up the stairs anymore, just so you know. And Utena's like, you mean I've been walking up these stairs this entire time when I could have taken an elevator? Excuse me? And so then Saionji shows up and he's like, the gondola is a pair of wings flying towards the end of the world. Okay. And she's like, what are you doing here? And he's like, it will carry me and the Rose Bride to the castle said to hold eternity. I'm like, oh, you got one case of roadhead, and now you're all good? What? And I like Mickey every time is like, I thought you said you were done with dueling. I love that Mickey's like, everybody's just going back on their word left and right. And he's like, I'm not the same person I was yesterday. I got a ride in a car and we did some crazy stuff. And they're like, how are you different? He's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then he just flings Choo Choo off. He's like, you wouldn't get it if I explained it. I'm like, I don't think we would. So I'm glad you're not trying to explain it. The fudge. But I'm like, Saionji, I'm like, were you really that easily manipulated by these two men with their shirts off? What? And then he smacks Mickey, which I'm like, but why? Why smacking Mickey? Like, are you okay? And then he grabs Anthy. She drops the lamp / water can. And he's like, the Rose Bride belongs to me. I'm like, Saionji, why you gotta be the worst? You were doing so well. Why? Why are these men manipulating you into believing that you have to have these toxic masculinity traits? But why? And Utena's like, really? Like let him and Mia go, Saionji. We've been through this song and dance before. So then we have, it looks like the alien UFO is coming back down, either crashing. Yeah, it crashes into the Dick Tower. The Shadow Girls crashed into the Dick Tower. Also, the end of the UFO looks like it looks like the little bulbs that are on the golden jar around the rose vase. But they crash into the Dick Tower. Good for the UFO girls. And they're like, have you heard the news? And they say, oh, there'll be another duel today in the forest behind the school. It's been so long since I've last heard those words. Naturally, it's better with two than with one. Half the suffering, double the joy. So we can't have a duel unless there's two people involved, right? And they're like, no, well, just wait a minute. And then it talks about them having this coexistence. And they're like, well, you took half my shampoo. Well, you ate my food. And they're like, really? And they're like, well, now, brave hero, it's hard to work as a pair. Have you ever heard of that? Now, I'm wondering if the it's hard to work as a pair is talking about Utena and Anthy working together against Saionji. That could be. Again, we talk about trinities. I wonder if that's part of it. And honestly, that kind of goes back to Land of the Lustrous, which I'm watching, and talking about how it's hard to work in trios rather than just pairs. So maybe part of this is that Akio feels like the third wheel and that he was left out from the Prince and Anthy and try to do something about it. Again, I'm throwing a lot of theories out here because we don't know the full-on scale. So we'll go back to the lyrics of this when we get to it, but I love the new transformation sequence. It's great. I'm going to miss walking up them spiral staircases, but the symbolism of Anthy's... I always wondered how she just got in the dress, but her clothes, as she's going up the little elevator, her clothes disappear and she gets on her war dress. And instantly changes into that. Now, the tree that develops from beneath Anthy's clothing, it splits into two at first, which I'm like, is that like representing like a uterus splitting into two, like the reproductive organs of a woman? Maybe. And then as they go up the spiral, we see the tree blossoming and blooming from there. And we see Utena changing into her new garb. The tree is developing through Anthy's uniform and developing pink blossoms. Like it's just blooming Yuri blossoms all over the place, right? Also, there's more lipstick now. I kind of like this. I like the idea that we have more femininity attributed to the transformation sequence because, yeah, to me, it seems like more of a symbol of Anthy and Utena transforming and kind of keeping that feminine aspect to the transformation instead of it being like more masculine, which I like it. There's more sensual touches. The hair is more glamorous. There's lipstick. It feels more like a female transformation, which is great. I'm all for it. Yes, please. And then, yeah, the blooms that go through the uniform sprout pink roses. Okay. I'm here for it. And then the pink roses that surround the two of them. I like the two of them together for this transformation. It's not just Utena walking up the stairs. She's with Anthy. They're together on this. It's great. I love it. Oh, so good. But yeah, they get to the top, and we have, in contrast to this, like, pink flower petals and femininity, in contrast to that, there is Saionji and this big-ass car that comes up through there. Like, why not? Like, why not? And this sword that is phallic-shaped as well. And they're like, you need to learn when to quit, senpai. If you really love Himamiya, try putting yourself in her shoes. And he's like, I have. Long ago, I did think about the Rose Bride's feelings. That's what made me so heated. So maybe before, talk about masculinity and everything, maybe Saionji felt similar to Anthy, and that's why he was so mad about it, because he understood her helplessness in making change and controlling her emotions, which is an interesting revelation. But he says the Rose Bride has no will of her own. But that's a lie. We know that Anthy has a will of her own. It's just Saionji's been told that she doesn't, because that's what Toga and them want him to think. And she's like, you're not going to get it until... I like that Utena's like, yeah, okay. And so the sword is called out from Himamiya, but all these cars pop up. Just wild. These random cars spinning their wheels. I think the idea that they're spinning their wheels and they're all on their sides is interesting. But the two of them go at it and start to fight. We'll go to the lyrics here in a little bit. And he's like, I'm not the same as when I lost to you. And he's like, I saw it. And he's like, I saw the world. Sure you did. Sure you did. Whatever you think the world is. He's like, you saw... The way that he says that, and his face is highlighted so sinisterly, I'm like, when you were shown the world, was it Akio's dick? Is that what you saw? Have you seen the light and saw what lies beyond you in adulthood? Like, what was the world that you saw? And Utena's like, the fudge? If you saw the world, why do you need to go up to the tower? I like that everything's just spinning its wheels too. It's not going anywhere, which seems symbolic of Saionji kind of being stuck in this state. So yeah, they clash back and forth underneath this tower that looks like, the castle looks like a star, And I was a little bit worried that Saionji might beat her in this moment, because especially when the sword disappears, because she's like, oh, crap, why did the sword disappear? We don't know. And she's like, why'd the sword vanish? Meanwhile, we see... Now, Toga and Akio watching with their opera glasses from the edge. The Sword of Dios is gone, so what does that mean? And Akio even looks a little bit confused, like, why did the Sword of Dios vanish? And neither of them say anything about it, which is interesting. So, did the Sword of Dios vanish because Utena was nervous and didn't know what he meant by the world, or was starting to doubt herself? I like the exhaust pipe still spitting out, but I like that she tries to protect the rose as she backs away. She's not giving up. She's just... And again, we see Anthy with the headlights are shining around behind her, and the headlights kind of resemble her glasses, and being like, we can't see what she's thinking in this moment as Utena is dodging. But then we get close up to her, and as she's trying to protect the sword... That's when Anthy remembers, if you're ever going through something and you need help, come to me first. And we'll always help each other out. I want us to have that kind of friendship. And that's when it's like Anthy, in that moment, kind of sees beyond being the Rose Bride, and she gains a little bit of her autonomy back. And that's when she protects Utena, right? So is Anthy the car? Is Anthy symbolic like the car, where she's the way for Utena to get? Is she the vehicle that is driving Utena up to see the prince? They keep going back and forth between Anthy and the vehicle. They keep drawing connections. Could be, but she saves Utena in that moment, and Saionji's like, what? She did something of her own will. And then she says together. And she's like, together we're going to defeat him. Now, what's interesting here is that I thought when she was going to pull the sword out of Utena, that it was going to be like what the Black Rose arc was, and Anthy was going to fight Saionji for a hot second, because I thought that was it. But no. Instead, she says, "O Rose of noble emotion." She says, "I beg of you to manifest." And so manifesting the rose coming out of Utena instead of her is wild. Like, it draws me back to the ED from the first part of this series where both Utena and Anthy were able to be with the prince and they were both in the dresses. So can both Utena and Anthy be the Rose Bride? What? Because the sword looks exactly the same, like the one that was drawn from Anthy. And yeah, and then in that moment, Anthy, she draws the sword out of Utena. They look like the yin and yang thing, the power to revolutionize the world. Are they drawing the sword out of one another, out of their love for one another? Maybe. Because then Utena gets a hold of it. And she's like, okay. And she's holding Anthy, even though Anthy is the one that pulled the sword out. What? And then the shadow on them is like a star, like the castle. And then the castle's lights all come on. And the lights from the headlights of the cars all shine up like laser beams. And the wheels start spinning. And in that moment, I wonder if Akio thought that the prince would come down from the castle. Because he seems to come down in that moment. But it's just the spirit of him that embodies Utena, and she has all the different shadows. She has the 4 shadows instead of just 2. And then the car swerves. I love that the car swerves, and Saionji is like Yamcha from Dragon Ball Z, where he's just been involved in a hit and run. Just our garbage disaster character, Saionji. And Utena's like, wow, this sword came out of me. That's a bit weird. How'd that work? But she turns over to Anthy like, okay, cool, we did it together. And Anthy's smiling back at her. I love the shot of both of them smiling at each other, and Saionji is just off to the side, just hit by a car. But it's interesting the way that it's composed, because you have the car that slid, Saionji's been in the hit and run, Utena and Anthy are looking at each other like, oh, teamwork makes the dream work, and then you have the edge of a precipice that's been chopped off, like we've just stumbled off the edge of something. Okay. And then, Toga says, that Saionji, after I went to such lengths to be friendly with him. You bitch, using Saionji to do your dirty work for you. Also, this scene here, there is no beating the allegations. It's over. Because then he's like, leans back, like he's in the middle of like this aphrodisiac moment. And Akio's like, are you enjoying this game that we're playing? And then he's like, of course. As he's like lies down on the bed, like stroking himself. And then Akio's like, well, then there is no problem, is there? And Akio has his pants undone in this moment. His full body exposed, his pants undone. Like, we're just playing a game and you're just playing it with me. So there's no harm, no foul, right? And then the two of them are literally in bed, like where one body begins and the other where one body ends and the other begins. Yeah. So they're both having sex, and Toga's just enjoying the moment and just playing the game because it's no skin off of him. What? And they're like, play nice with your friend. You're quite the evil man. Yeah, Akio is evil, and Toga is not much different because he's like, be nice to your friend, Saionji. He's pretty innocent. I'm like, oh my god. So then in the observatory, I was like, that scene is bad enough because Akio is clearly taking advantage of Toga and having sex with him, but Toga seems very complicit in it. So part of me is like, oh, is reaching eternity involve having sexual relations with Akio? Did that happen with Mikage when he wanted eternity? Is that how that went down? Because Mikage was pretty coded as being homosexual. So, but at least with Toga, it's consensual, and Toga is just playing the game and having fun, even though it is, in my opinion, grooming. At least Toga seems to be consenting to it, even though it's not right. But here, we finally have Anthy sticking up for herself, and she does not want to be with Akio. In the past, when Akio has told her to come to him, she's put her glasses down. She seems to have consented with it. Whether or not, we don't know if he was controlling her or not. That remains to be seen. But here he says the sword of Dios did not take form. The sword of Dios did not take form. Like he's trying to figure out what's going on. And Anthy's like, I don't want to tell you what happened. And yet she won the duel. Anthy's like, I don't want to give him any more information than he already has. Because it seems like she doesn't want Anthy to get hurt or Anthy to be involved. And he's like, oh, what a sight it was. And he says, come to me, Anthy, in that moment. And she tenses up like she doesn't want to come. And that's when he grabs her and says, get over here. And it shuts. And then poor Under the Rings of Saturn, Utena's like, man, what's keeping you, Himamiya? And then we see in the Dick Tower the idea of Himamiya being stuck underneath him. Ugh. Nope. Nope. Like, she doesn't have any control over it. Nope, he's gotta go. He's gotta burn in the fires of hell. He shall surely burn. No, Akio is like the big bad, and I hate him so much. I'm like, nope, you've just instantly gone to the bottom of the barrel. Absolutely not. So then we have the lyrics to the ED as we're going up the gondola. So the lyrics are prehistory, perfection, solitude in the desert, air, atoms, celestial body of causality. Oh, causality! We're getting another Berserk reference. Awesome. Yes, a child of the earth is conceived. I love this line, an embryo of philosophy. I love it because humanity is like the one species that gets philosophical and has these thoughts beyond just instinctual things. And so then it's the idea they said, and heaven of the moon, right? So is the moon heaven? There's the pink rose, heaven of Mercury, heaven of Venus. Well, we know about Venus because that's Akio. If we talk about Mercury, I want to look at Mercury and Saturn because Saturn was in that one there. Mercury and Saturn. It says Mercury and Saturn are two very important planets in astrology. The alignments of these planets can have significant effects interpreted in different ways. The Mercury, when these planets are in a square position, it can create tension that challenges people to face their doubts, weaknesses, and fears. The alignment can be a time for transformation and development and can encourage people to their own goals and make an impact. Well, if Saturn is aligned with Utena and Mercury, I feel like Mercury could be assigned to Anthy because Mercury is a messenger and kind of an in-between person. So that could be tied with Anthy. It says Mercury is associated with communication, intelligence, and wit. Saturn is associated with discipline, hard work, and responsibility. And it says when Mercury and Saturn are opposing each other, it can create a tug of war between desire for clarity and the weight of responsibilities, which can create frustration and self-doubt. Well, if Utena wants clarity from Anthy, which is kind of what she's asked for in this episode, but Anthy has this weight of responsibility and her tie to Akio, then yes, we could tie that together. That would kind of make sense. So interesting, because it says heaven of Mercury, heaven of Venus, and it says heaven of the sun, heaven of Mars, and we see Anthy and her holding the rose together, heaven of Jupiter, heaven of Saturn. Yeah, all the planets, right? And then the rose blooming between them, and then we see Anthy touching the rose on Utena's chest, and then her like kissing the rose, which is, and then heaven of fixed stars and them kissing in that moment. Yes, that's what I need. Please. I want this to happen in real life, not just the ED. I want them to be together, not just in the ED, but in real life as they descend to the castle. Please let this happen. A type of perpetual motion machine. Motion from nothing. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. It is motion from nothing. Oh, and the white bird flying towards the castle. And there's like a moon. There's a trident. Oh my gosh. There's all these little different symbols. The sun, the moon, the trident. Oh my God. Yes. Oh, there's so much. And oh my God, I've talked an hour and a half. If you're still here, kudos. My throat is getting hoarse. I'm going to have to drink some honey. Tea and honey. Oh my God. I'm sure I haven't unlocked all the symbolism in this episode. I'm sure I've not unlocked all of it at all. But I am obsessed. I can't believe we had such an explicit sexual metaphor in this episode. I hate Akio. The fact that he's abusing and assaulting Anthy. In the words of Debbie Jelinski, he has to go. Now it's just a matter of, we need to get Utena on the same page as all of us to be like, oh, he's a creep. Nope, he's got to leave. Well, I'm going to be terrified for the rest of this series, so I hope you're all ready. What do we got? We got 13 weeks left. 14 if we include the movie. Oh, buddy. I'm not ready for any of this, but I guess we're going to do it, so. Anyway, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts down below. I know it's going to be hard to not spoil me, but please try your best. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Take care. Holy shit. I'll be back real soon with more Revolutionary Girl Utena. See you then.